Commander Sarah Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the pristine white floors of Station Harmony. The massive space station orbited Earth like a gleaming jewel, serving as humanity's first official diplomatic outpost with alien civilizations. After 3 years of careful negotiations, 12 different species had agreed to establish peaceful contact with Earth's inhabitants. Sarah had been chosen to lead the human delegation because of her background in xenobiology and her calm demeanor under pressure. What she hadn't expected was the strange behavior she witnessed during her first week aboard the station. The aliens were polite, almost painfully so. They maintained perfect distances from humans during meetings, never allowing their bodies to come within arm's reach. When documents needed to be exchanged, they used robotic arms or placed items on tables for humans to collect later. Even the most casual conversations happened across wide rooms or through communication screens. During her morning briefing with Ambassador Kethlar of the Zephyrian Confederation, Sarah noticed how the tall, blue-skinned diplomat's forearms trembled slightly whenever she moved closer to the conference table. His large silver eyes would dart away from her face, focusing instead on the holographic displays between them. "Ambassador," Sarah said gently, "I hope our presence isn't making you uncomfortable. If there's something about human customs that concerns your people, please let us know." Kethlar's breathing apparatus fluttered. A sign Sarah had learned indicated emotional distress among his species. "Your customs are acceptable, Commander Chen. We simply prefer to maintain appropriate distances for safety reasons." The word safety puzzled Sarah. Humans had undergone extensive medical examinations before being cleared for contact. Every possible disease, parasite, or biological incompatibility had been tested and ruled out. The medical data had been shared with all species months before anyone set foot on the station. Later that day, Sarah walked through the central plaza, where various species mingled in carefully segregated zones. She watched a group of young Krillian researchers working near a fountain. Their insect-like bodies moved with natural grace. But when a human child from the civilian quarter accidentally dropped her toy ball near their workspace, the Krillians immediately backed away. The little girl, maybe 8 years old, approached the bright blue ball with innocent curiosity about the aliens nearby. One of the Krillians, barely more than a juvenile himself based on his size, stared at the child with what Sarah could only describe as longing. His mandibles clicked softly and his antennae twitched with obvious fascination. Sarah moved closer, pretending to examine a nearby information display while eavesdropping on the Krillian conversation. Her universal translator picked up fragments of their exchange. "She's so small and soft-looking," the young Krillian whispered to his companion. "Do you think their skin is as warm as the report suggests?" "Hush, Ziktar," his older companion replied urgently. "You know we cannot even think such thoughts. The prohibition is absolute, but why?" Ziktar's voice carried a note of genuine sadness. "The humans seem kind. They smile at us. Yesterday, one of their females waved at me from across the dining hall. I wanted to wave back, but nothing. The council has spoken. No physical contact with humans under any circumstances, not even the briefest touch." Sarah's heart ached as she watched the young alien's shoulders slump in disappointment. The little human girl had retrieved her ball and skipped away, completely unaware of the emotional turmoil she had inadvertently caused. That evening, Sarah met with Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief medical officer, in her private quarters. Elena had been monitoring the health of all species aboard the station and had access to the most comprehensive biological data available. "Elena, I need to ask you something and I need a completely honest answer," Sarah said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from her personal supply. "Is there any medical reason why aliens shouldn't touch humans? Something we might have missed in our screenings?" Elena frowned, her dark eyes reflecting concern. "Absolutely not. We've run every test imaginable. Blood samples, skin cultures, respiratory analysis, even electromagnetic field measurements. Humans are completely safe for physical contact with every species on this station. In fact, several species have biological compatibility that would actually benefit from limited physical interaction. Then why do they act like we're made of poison?" "I've been wondering the same thing," Elena admitted. "But whenever I try to discuss it with alien medical staff, they change the subject or claim they need to consult with their homeworld authorities." Sarah spent the next few days observing more carefully. She noticed that alien children especially seemed drawn to humans. often approaching as close as they dared before being quickly guided away by adults. During interspecies cultural presentations, aliens would lean forward with obvious interest when humans spoke, but immediately pull back if a human gestured too broadly. The breakthrough came during an emergency situation. A malfunction in the station's atmospheric processors threatened to vent toxic gases into the civilian quarters. Sarah found herself working alongside Technora, a Sylvian engineer with crystalline skin that changed colors based on her emotions. As they raced to reroute emergency power, a falling beam knocked Sarah off balance. Instinctively, Technora reached out to steady her, their hands briefly touching as Sarah regained her footing. For just a moment, both women froze, staring at their joined hands. Technora's crystalline skin immediately shifted to a deep purple, and her large eyes filled with what looked remarkably like tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, quickly pulling away. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "The council will—" "Technora, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, genuine concern in her voice. "You helped me. You prevented me from getting hurt. Why are you apologizing?" The Sylvian engineer's skin continued to shift through various shades of blue and purple, indicating severe emotional distress. She looked around frantically as if expecting security forces to materialize at any moment. "I touched you," Technora said, her voice barely audible above the emergency alarms. "I actually touched a human." We're not allowed to touch humans." "But why?" Sarah pressed gently. "Who says you're not allowed?" Technora's skin began to pale as she struggled with some internal conflict. "The Council of Worlds. The agreement we signed. No species is permitted physical contact with humans under any circumstances. The penalty for violation is—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her terrified expression told Sarah everything she needed to know. As they completed the emergency repairs in silence, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who was this Council of Worlds? Why had humans never been told about this prohibition? And most importantly, what were the aliens so afraid of that they would deny themselves even the most basic physical interaction with another sentient species? The answer, Sarah suspected, would change everything humans thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Technora's terrified reaction to their brief touch replayed in her mind over and over. She had tried to find the Sylvian engineer after their shift ended, but Technora had vanished, and her quarters were locked with a security seal that Sarah's access codes couldn't override. The next morning brought disturbing news. Dr. Vasquez contacted Sarah before dawn with an urgent message. "Sarah, you need to see this." Technora was taken from the station during the night. Her people came for her with some kind of special transport. They wouldn't let me examine her or even say goodbye. Sarah dressed quickly and met Elena in the medical bay. The doctor looked exhausted, her usually neat hair disheveled from staying up all night reviewing security footage. "Look at this," Elena said, pulling up the surveillance recordings on her main screen. 3 Sylvian ships arrived at 300 hours. No advance notice, no clearance request. They just appeared and demanded immediate access to their citizen. The footage showed Technora being escorted by 6 heavily armed Sylvian guards. Her crystalline skin had turned completely black, a color Sarah had never seen on any Sylvian before. Even more disturbing, Technora walked with her head down, her hands bound behind her back with some kind of energy restraints. "Elena, she looked like a prisoner," Sarah whispered. They were treating her like a criminal. "It gets worse," Elena continued, switching to another recording. "I managed to capture this audio before they activated their privacy shields. The recording was faint, but Sarah could hear Technora's voice pleading with her guards. Please, it was an accident. The human was falling. I couldn't let her be hurt. I followed my instincts. Surely the council will understand that I meant no harm." A harsh voice responded in the Sylvian language, but the translator provided subtitles. "Instincts are no excuse. You have contaminated yourself with human contact. The rehabilitation process will determine if you can ever return to proper society." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "Rehabilitation? Elena, what kind of society punishes someone for preventing an injury?" Before Elena could answer, Sarah's communication device chimed with an urgent message from the station administrator. All human personnel were requested to attend an immediate assembly in the main conference chamber. No explanation was given, but the message was marked with the highest priority designation. When Sarah arrived at the conference chamber, she found every human on the station gathered together, Nearly 200 diplomats, scientists, medical staff, and civilians. Facing them across a wide expanse of empty space stood representatives from all 12 alien species. Their body language tense and formal. Ambassador Kethlar stepped forward, his forearms clasped rigidly behind his back. "Humans of Earth," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber's amplification system. "We must address a serious violation of the contact protocols that occurred yesterday during the atmospheric emergency." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized where this was heading. She started to stand, but Dr. Vasquez grabbed her arm, shaking her head slightly. "One of our citizens made unauthorized physical contact with a human," Kethler continued. "This individual has been removed from the station for proper processing. However, we must now discuss the implications of this breach." Captain Morrison, the human commanding officer, stepped forward. "Ambassador, with respect, I've reviewed our copy of the contact protocols extensively. There is no mention of any prohibition against physical contact between species. In fact, our cultural exchange programs specifically include provisions for handshakes, embraces, and other forms of friendly physical interaction." A murmur of concern rippled through the alien delegation. Several species began communicating in rapid, hushed tones through their translators. Sarah noticed that many of the younger aliens looked genuinely surprised, as if hearing this information for the first time. Kethlar's breathing apparatus fluttered rapidly. "Captain Morrison, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. The protocols you received were the public version designed for general distribution. The actual implementation guidelines contain additional safety measures that were deemed necessary by the Council of Worlds." "What Council of Worlds?" Captain Morrison demanded. "Earth was never informed of any such organization. We negotiated directly with each of your governments individually." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah watched as the alien representatives exchanged increasingly worried glances. It was becoming clear that something had been hidden from humanity, and the truth was starting to unravel. An elderly Vraxian diplomat, her silver scales dulled with age, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "it is time for honesty. Humans of Earth, you were not told about the Council of Worlds because the prohibition against touching your species was implemented specifically because of your species." "What do you mean?" Dr. Vasquez called out from the crowd. The Vraxian diplomat's head crest flattened against her skull, a sign of deep shame among her people. 3 years ago, when first contact protocols were being established, the Council commissioned a comprehensive study of human biology and psychology. The results were unprecedented. She paused, clearly struggling with the words. "Your species possesses qualities that are addictive to other sentient races. Not in a harmful way, but in a manner that fundamentally changes how we experience social bonding and emotional connection." Sarah felt the room grow silent as hundreds of humans processed this revelation. "Are you saying," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber, "that other species avoid touching us because they might like it too much?" "Not just like it," interjected Ziktar, the young Krillian Sarah had observed earlier. He had apparently slipped away from the adult delegation and approached the boundary between the two groups. "Commander Chen, when my nest brother was selected for the advanced survey team that studied your planet, he spent 6 months observing human settlements from a distance. An older Krillian immediately moved to silence Ziktar, but the young alien continued speaking rapidly. When he returned, he was changed. He spoke constantly of human kindness, of the way humans comfort each other with touch, of how peaceful he felt just watching humans interact. He requested permission to return to Earth permanently. When the Council refused, Ziktar's mandibles clicked in distress. He stopped eating. He stopped engaging with his nestmates. The medical specialist said he was experiencing something they had never seen before. "Withdrawal," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her medical training immediately recognizing the symptoms. "Yes," the elderly Vraxian confirmed sadly. "Withdrawal from human contact. Not just the physical touch, but the entire human approach to social bonding. Your species has an unprecedented ability to make others feel valued, protected, and emotionally satisfied. Physical contact amplifies this effect exponentially." Captain Morrison's face had gone pale. "So you've been treating us like a drug. Like we're something dangerous." "Not dangerous," Kethlar protested weakly. "Irresistible. The preliminary studies suggested that extended contact with humans could fundamentally alter the social structures of our civilizations. Imagine if our citizens began to prefer human companionship to that of their own species. Imagine if our young people abandoned their homeworlds to live among humans. Sarah understood now why Technora had been so terrified. You're afraid that if your people spend time with humans, they'll choose us over you. The silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah looked around at her fellow humans, seeing her own mixture of sadness and anger reflected in their faces. They had been welcomed to the galaxy as equals, only to discover they were being treated as a controlled substance. But as she watched the younger aliens in the delegation, many of whom were staring at the humans with obvious longing, Sarah began to wonder if the Council's fears might actually be justified. And more importantly, she wondered what would happen when the galaxy's youth discovered that their leaders had been lying to them about the true nature of human contact. The real question wasn't whether aliens were allowed to touch humans. The question was whether anyone could stop them once they learned what they were missing. The conference chamber erupted into chaos. Young aliens pushed forward against the restraining hands of their elders, while human voices rose in angry protests. Sarah watched in fascination as the careful diplomatic order that had governed the station for months crumbled in a matter of minutes. "You've been lying to your own people," Captain Morrison accused, his voice cutting through the noise. "Look at them. They didn't know any of this." Indeed, many of the younger alien delegates appeared shocked and confused. Sarah saw Ziktar arguing intensely with his elder in rapid Krillian, his antennae flickering with what she now recognized as desperate curiosity rather than fear. Ambassador Kethalar raised all four arms for silence. "Please, everyone must remain calm. The Council's decisions were made for the protection of all species involved. The research showed that prolonged exposure to human social bonding could cause irreversible psychological changes in non-human species." "What kind of changes?" Dr. Vasquez demanded, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. The elderly Vraxian diplomat exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. "Enhanced emotional stability, increased empathy, reduced aggression, and most concerning to the Council, a preference for cooperative rather than hierarchical social structures." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Those sound like positive changes." "For individuals, perhaps," Kethalar replied stiffly. "But our societies have evolved over millions of years with specific social structures. The Zephyrian Confederation, for example, maintains order through a strict caste system based on genetic specialization. If our citizens began to value individual merit over bloodline designation, our entire civilization could collapse." A young Zephyrian female near the back of the alien delegation spoke up, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "And would that be so terrible, Uncle?" The formal address indicated a family relationship, but her tone carried unmistakable challenge. Kethalar's silver eyes widened in horror as he realized his own niece was questioning the fundamental principles of their society. "Nira Tel, you do not understand the complexities involved," he said, his voice pleading. "I understand that yesterday I watched a human child share her lunch with a maintenance droid because she thought it looked lonely," Nira Tel replied. "I understand that humans comfort each other when they're sad, celebrate each other's successes without jealousy, and risk their own safety to help strangers. If exposure to such behavior would change us, perhaps we need changing." Her words sent a wave of shock through both groups. Sarah saw several alien elders activate private communication devices, undoubtedly calling for immediate backup or instruction from their homeworlds. But the young aliens were no longer listening to their elders. Ziktar had moved closer to the invisible boundary that separated the two groups, his large compound eyes fixed on Sarah with unmistakable hope. "Commander Chen," he said softly, "when you saw me watching the human child yesterday, you smiled at me. Not the formal diplomatic smile we've been taught to recognize, but something warmer. It made me feel, I don't have words in any language for what it made me feel." Sarah's heart ached for the young Krillian. She could see the longing in his posture, the way his delicate hands trembled as he spoke. Acting on instinct, she took a step forward. "Ziktar," she said gently, "would you like to try a human handshake?" The reaction was immediate and explosive. Adult aliens rushed forward to physically restrain their younger colleagues, while humans instinctively moved to protect Sarah from what appeared to be an attack. Only quick intervention by Captain Morrison prevented the situation from escalating into actual violence. "Stop," Morrison commanded, his military training evident in the authority of his voice. Everyone step back now. As order was reluctantly restored, Sarah found herself face to face with the elderly Vraxian diplomat, who had positioned herself directly between Sarah and the young aliens. "Commander Chen," the Vraxian said quietly, "I beg you to understand. What you offer so casually could destroy everything these young ones have ever known. Yes, human contact brings joy and peace and emotional fulfillment, but it also brings change that cannot be undone. You're talking about them like they're children who can't make their own decisions," Sarah replied. "They're sentient beings with their own agency, are they?" Kethler interjected. "Our research suggests that human contact affects the brain chemistry of other species in ways that compromise rational decision-making. Would you offer alcohol to someone who had never experienced intoxication? Would you introduce a powerful narcotic to someone who had no concept of addiction?" Dr. Vasquez pushed forward, her medical expertise finally finding relevance in the conversation. "That's a false analogy, Ambassador. Human social bonding isn't a drug. It's a natural biological function that promotes psychological health and social stability. If other species are capable of forming deeper emotional connections through contact with humans, that's not addiction, that's evolution." "Evolution toward what?" demanded a crystalline delegate whose body structure reminded Sarah of living glass. "Toward abandoning our own species in favor of yours? Toward restructuring our societies to match human preferences? Toward losing everything that makes us who we are?" The chamber fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of this question. Sarah realized that the issue went far deeper than simple physical contact. The aliens weren't just afraid of touching humans, they were afraid of becoming human in spirit. Suddenly, a new voice broke the silence. It came from the station's communication system, broadcasting from an external source. "This is Technora of the Sylvian Republic, transmitting from the rehabilitation facility on Kepler Station." Every head in the chamber turned toward the speakers as Technora's voice continued, weak but determined. "I am speaking without authorization, and will face severe consequences for this transmission. But the humans deserve to know the truth." Sarah's heart raced as she listened to the brave Sylvian engineer who had been taken away in the night. "The rehabilitation process," Technora continued, "involves neural conditioning designed to eliminate the memory of human contact and create an artificial aversion to human proximity. I have undergone 3 sessions and each time they have failed. The sensation of Commander Chen's hand in mine, the feeling of trust and safety and connection, cannot be erased because it represents something my species has been missing for centuries." Static began to interfere with the transmission, suggesting that Technora's signal was being jammed. "Before they cut my transmission," she said urgently, "I want the young ones to know. The Council's research was incomplete. Yes, contact with humans changes us, but the changes make us better. More compassionate, more cooperative, more capable of joy. The Council fears losing control over populations that might choose happiness over hierarchy." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, alien elders rigid with fear and anger, human colleagues radiating protective fury, and young aliens whose expressions showed a mixture of hope and heartbreak that transcended species barriers. The truth was finally out. The question now was what everyone would do with it. Niratel, the young Zephyrian who had challenged her uncle earlier, stepped forward once again. This time she didn't stop at the invisible boundary. She walked directly towards Sarah, her movements graceful and determined. "I choose to risk the change," she said simply, extending her hand in the universal gesture of greeting. Behind her, a dozen other young aliens followed suit while their elders called out in alarm and desperation. Sarah stared at Niratel's extended hand, knowing that this single moment would change the course of human-alien relations forever. Behind the young Zephyrian, her uncle Kethler pleaded desperately for her to reconsider, while other alien elders activated emergency communication devices to contact their homeworlds. "Niratel, please," Kethlar begged, his forearms trembling with emotion. "You don't understand what you're asking for. The conditioning process cannot be reversed. Once you experience human contact, you can never go back to the way things were." "Perhaps I don't want to go back," Niratel replied, her silver eyes fixed on Sarah's face. Perhaps none of us want to go back to a life where we're forbidden to experience compassion and connection. Sarah looked at the young alien's outstretched hand, then at the faces of both species surrounding them. She could see fear in the alien elders, protective anger in her human colleagues, and desperate hope in the young aliens who had followed Niratel forward. "Commander Chen," Captain Morrison said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can demand a full diplomatic review, contact Earth government, involve the United Nations." "And how long would that take?" Sarah asked, never taking her eyes off Niratel. "Months? Years? While these young people suffer for wanting something as basic as friendship?" Dr. Vasquez moved to Sarah's side. "From a medical standpoint, there's no danger. Human contact has never harmed any species we've encountered. If anything, the psychological benefits seem to be significant." Sarah made her decision. She reached out and gently took Niratel's hand in her own. The effect was immediate and profound. Niratel's silver eyes widened and a sound escaped her throat that the universal translator couldn't interpret, something between a gasp and a sigh of relief. Her crystalline hand was warm and surprisingly soft, with a slight vibration that Sarah realized was the young alien's equivalent of a purr. "Oh," Niratel whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Oh, I understand now. This is what we've been missing. This is what they've been so afraid of." The other young aliens pressed forward, no longer able to contain themselves. Ziktar reached Sarah next, his insectoid features somehow managing to convey wonder as she gently shook his chitinous hand. His mandibles clicked in a rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. "It's like being welcomed home," he said in amazement, "like belonging somewhere for the first time in my life." One by one, the young aliens approached. A Vraxian whose scales shifted to brilliant gold at Sarah's touch. A crystalline whose entire body began to emit a soft musical humming. A young Felinian whose fur stood on end with what was clearly pleasure rather than fear. Each contact seemed to energize the aliens in ways that were visible to everyone in the chamber. Their postures straightened. Their movements became more fluid and their interactions with each other grew warmer and more open. But the adult aliens were becoming increasingly agitated. Emergency signals were flashing on their communication devices, and several species were speaking rapidly in their native languages. "This must stop immediately," declared the eldest Krillian present, his voice harsh with authority. "These younglings are compromising their ability to function in normal society. They're becoming addicted to human presence, are they?" Dr. Vasquez challenged, pulling up readings on her portable medical scanner. "Because what I'm seeing are elevated levels of oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, the same chemicals associated with healthy social bonding in humans. These aren't symptoms of addiction, they're symptoms of emotional healing." The Krillian elder's antennae flattened against his head. "Doctor, you don't understand our biology. These chemical changes will make them unable to form proper bonds with their own species." "That's not true," Niratel interjected, still holding Sarah's hand. "I feel more connected to all of you now, not less. The warmth, the acceptance, it's not something I want to hoard. It's something I want to share." To demonstrate her point, she reached out with her free hand to touch her uncle's arm. Kethlar initially pulled away, but when their skin made contact, his breathing apparatus fluttered in surprise. "Uncle," she said softly, "when was the last time someone in our family embraced you? When did we last gather simply to enjoy each other's company, without agenda or hierarchy?" Kethlar's expression was pained. "Niratel, our ways have maintained order for millennia. The caste system provides structure, purpose, stability. But not happiness," she replied gently. "Not the kind of joy I see in human families. Not the unconditional support they offer each other." Captain Morrison had been observing the exchange with growing understanding. "Ambassador," he said to Kethlar, "what if the Council's fear isn't that aliens will become addicted to humans, but that they'll realize what they've been missing in their own societies?" Before anyone could respond, the chamber's main communication system activated with an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display showed 12 different alien leaders. Apparently, the Council of Worlds that had been referenced earlier. The central figure was an ancient Zephyrian whose caste markings identified him as Supreme Arbitrator. "This is Veltar Kethanosis speaking for the Council of Worlds. We are aware of the situation developing on Station Harmony. All young citizens who have experienced unauthorized human contact are to be immediately quarantined and prepared for emergency transport to rehabilitation facilities. A collective gasp rose from the young aliens, many of whom pressed closer to their human friends in obvious fear. Furthermore, the Supreme Arbitrator continued, all human personnel are to be confined to designated areas pending a full review of the contact protocols. Physical interaction between humans and any council species is now classified as a Class A violation of interspecies law. Now wait just a minute, Captain Morrison protested, stepping into the hologram's field of view. Earth never agreed to any such classification. Humans are not weapons or controlled substances. We're sentient beings with our own rights and sovereignty. The Supreme Arbitrator's silver eyes fixed on Morrison with unmistakable disdain. Captain, your species' rights extend only to your own star system. Within council space, council law prevails. Compliance is not optional. Sarah felt Niratel's hand tighten in hers as fear and determination warred in the young alien's expression. Around them, other young aliens drew closer to their human contacts, forming a protective circle. What if we refuse? Sarah asked, her voice carrying clearly to the council leaders. What if these young people choose to stay with us? The silence that followed was ominous. Finally, the Supreme Arbitrator spoke again. Then they will be declared lost to their species and can never return to their homeworlds. They will become stateless refugees, dependent entirely on human charity for survival. It was an ultimatum designed to force separation through guilt and fear. But as Sarah looked around at the young aliens surrounding her, she saw something the council hadn't anticipated. She saw determination. Ziktar was the first to speak. Then we choose exile, he said quietly. We choose the possibility of happiness over the certainty of emptiness. One by one, the other young aliens nodded their agreement, their decision echoing across the chamber and through the communication link to the Council of Worlds. The Supreme Arbitrator's expression darkened. So be it, you have 1 hour to prepare. After that, any council citizen remaining in human proximity will be considered a hostile actor and treated accordingly. The transmission ended, leaving both species staring at each other across a chasm that had suddenly become much deeper and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The hour deadline hung over Station Harmony like a storm cloud. Sarah watched as the young aliens who had chosen to stay with humans huddled together in the human quarters, while their elder relatives pleaded, threatened, and wept in equal measure. Ambassador Kethlar paced frantically around his niece, all 4 arms gesturing in desperate supplication. Niratel, please reconsider. You have a life on Zephyr Prime, a career, friends, a future mate selected by the Genetic Compatibility Council. You're throwing away everything for a feeling that might fade. Niratel sat calmly beside Sarah on one of the human couches, her hand still intertwined with the commander's. Her silver skin had taken on a subtle luminescence that hadn't been there before human contact. Uncle, my future mate was chosen based on caste compatibility and genetic optimization. We've never even spoken beyond formal greetings. My friends are colleagues assigned to my social circle by the Productivity Council, and my career involves designing atmospheric processors for colonies I'll never see. She squeezed Sarah's hand gently. In 1 hour of human contact, I've experienced more genuine connection than in 30 years of Zephyrian society. Similar conversations were happening throughout the chamber. Ziktar's nest parents had arrived via emergency transport and were begging him to reconsider. The young Krillian's response broke Sarah's heart. You ask me to return to a life where emotional bonds are considered weakness, he told them, his mandibles clicking sadly. Where individual desires are subordinated to hive efficiency. Where I've spent my entire adult life feeling empty and alone, not understanding why. I know why now. We weren't meant to live without connection. Dr. Vasquez moved through the group, taking medical readings from both the young aliens and their distressed relatives. Her findings were remarkable. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, pulling up data on her scanner. The young aliens aren't just experiencing elevated happiness chemicals. Their stress hormones have dropped to levels I've never seen in their species. Their immune systems are functioning more efficiently. Even their neural activity suggests improved cognitive function. And the older aliens? Elena's expression grew troubled. They're showing signs of severe psychological distress. Not because of human contact, but because they're watching their young ones experience something they've been denied their entire lives. I think some of them are beginning to understand what they've sacrificed for their social systems. Indeed, several of the older aliens were observing the human-alien interactions with expressions that mixed longing with fear. Sarah noticed that Ambassador Kethlar's breathing had become irregular, as he watched his niece's obvious contentment. Captain Morrison was coordinating with Earth Command, his voice tense as he spoke into his secure communicator. "Yes, sir, I understand the diplomatic implications, but we're talking about sentient beings seeking asylum from oppressive governments. The Human Rights Council has clear protocols for this situation." Sarah caught fragments of the response from Morrison's earpiece. Earth's government was divided. Some officials wanted to avoid conflict with the Council of Worlds at all costs. Others insisted that humanity had a moral obligation to protect those seeking freedom. 15 minutes remaining, announced the station's computer system, its neutral voice somehow making the deadline sound even more ominous. That's when the unexpected happened. Technora's voice came through the communication system again, stronger this time. "Citizens of the galaxy, this is Technora, broadcasting from the rehabilitation facility on Kepler Station. I have disabled the jamming systems and am transmitting on all Council emergency frequencies." The chamber fell silent as everyone listened. "I want you to know that the rehabilitation process is not medical treatment, it's psychological. Torture designed to eliminate our capacity for emotional growth. They are using neural disruptors to damage the parts of our brains that allow us to form deep connections with others." Gasps of horror rose from both humans and aliens. "But more importantly," Technora continued, "I want the youth of our worlds to know that there are hundreds of us here who chose human contact over isolation. We represent dozens of species, all being treated for the crime of seeking emotional fulfillment." The transmission quality improved, suggesting that others were helping to amplify the signal. "The Council tells you that human contact is dangerous because it changes us. This is true. It changes us from isolated, fearful beings into connected, compassionate ones. It transforms our understanding of what society could be if built on cooperation rather than control." Through the static, other voices began to join Technora's broadcast. Young aliens from across the galaxy, sharing their experiences of brief human contact and the profound impact it had on their lives. A Vraxian voice. "I touched a human child's hand for 3 seconds during a diplomatic function. For 3 seconds I understood what peace felt like." A crystalline voice. "A human scientist shared her lunch with me when she saw I was working through my rest period. The gesture of caring changed how I view the purpose of existence." A Thelinian voice. "A human musician played a song for me when I expressed sadness about leaving my home world. For the first time in my life I felt truly understood." The broadcast continued. Dozens of young aliens sharing stories of brief, forbidden contact with humans and the lasting impact these moments had created. But the most powerful voice belonged to someone unexpected, an elderly Zephyrian whose caste markings identified him as a high-ranking council member. "My name is Nethvar Veltosis. I am a senior arbitrator of the Council of Worlds, and I have been complicit in a lie that has cost our civilizations centuries of potential growth and happiness." The silence in the chamber was absolute. 40 years ago, I was part of a secret research mission to observe human colonies. What we discovered was not that humans were dangerous, but that they possessed something we had lost long ago: the ability to create societies based on mutual support rather than hierarchical control. His voice carried the weight of deep regret. "We feared that exposure to human social structures would lead our citizens to question the systems that keep us in power. We were right to fear, but wrong to suppress. I have spent 4 decades watching my own people live diminished lives because we denied them the possibility of emotional fulfillment." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to the confession. "Young ones who have chosen exile over emptiness," Nethavar continued. "You are not lost to us. You are showing us the way forward, the path to becoming who we were always meant to be." The transmission ended just as the station's alert system began to sound. Through the viewports, Sarah could see Council warships approaching, their weapons systems clearly visible. But she could also see something else: smaller ships from a dozen different worlds, piloted by young aliens who had heard the broadcasts and were choosing freedom over fear. 5 minutes to deadline, the computer announced. Captain Morrison stepped to the center of the chamber, his expression grim but determined. "Anyone who wants to leave with the Council ships is free to do so. Anyone who chooses to stay will be under Earth's protection. But understand, this decision changes everything. There's no going back after this. Sarah looked around at the young aliens who had chosen to stay. Their faces showed fear, yes, but also hope and determination. They were about to become refugees, cut off from their homeworlds and dependent on human kindness for survival. But they were also about to become the pioneers of a new kind of interspecies relationship, one based on choice rather than restriction, connection rather than separation. The first shot from the Council warships struck the station's outer hull just as the deadline expired. The war for the right to touch had begun. The station shuddered under the impact of the Council warships' warning shots. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red as Station Harmony's defensive systems activated. Sarah felt Niratel's hand tighten in hers as the young Zephyrian stared through the viewport at the ships bearing her people's military insignia. "They're actually going to attack," she whispered, her silver eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "My own government is willing to kill me rather than let me choose my own path." Captain Morrison was coordinating the station's response from a portable command console. "Shields at full power. All non-essential personnel to emergency stations. Send a priority transmission to Earth Command. We need backup now." But help was already arriving. The smaller ships that had been approaching during the countdown were now revealed to be more than Sarah had initially realized. Dozens of vessels from across the galaxy, each one carrying young aliens who had somehow learned about the situation and chosen to join the refugees. Dr. Vasquez was monitoring the incoming ships while also keeping track of the young aliens already on the station. "Sarah, we've got representatives from over 30 species coming in. They're broadcasting on open channels, telling their own stories of forbidden human contact and the positive changes it brought to their lives." Through the communication system, these new voices joined the growing chorus of resistance to the Council's policies. "This is Yaratel of the Aquarian Collective," came one voice. "6 months ago, a human deep-sea researcher shared her oxygen supply with me when my equipment failed. The trust she showed in that moment opened my eyes to possibilities I never knew existed." "Grixnock of the Silicon Commonwealth here," announced another. "A human child drew a picture of my homeworld and gave it to me at a cultural exhibition. No one in my species has ever created art purely for the joy of giving it to another. That one gesture changed how I understand the purpose of existence." The testimonials continued to flood in as more ships arrived. Sarah realized that what was happening wasn't just a refugee crisis, it was a revolution. The Council warships responded to the growing resistance by increasing their aggressive posturing. Larger vessels began to arrive, their formations clearly indicating preparation for a serious military engagement. Ambassador Kethlar was speaking urgently into his own communicator, trying to reach someone in the Council hierarchy. "Supreme Arbitrator, please, this can be resolved peacefully. My niece and the others are not criminals. They're young people seeking emotional fulfillment that our societies have denied them." The response that came back through the speakers was cold and final. "Ambassador, your emotional attachment to this situation has compromised your judgment. Return to your ship immediately or be classified as a hostile collaborator." Kethlar stared at the communicator in shock. "Supreme Arbitrator, I have served the Council faithfully for 60 years. I have never questioned orders or challenged policy, but I cannot stand by and watch you destroy our youth for the crime of seeking happiness." "Then you have chosen your side," came the reply. "Security forces are authorized to treat you as they would any other rebel." The communication cut off, leaving Kethlar staring at his hands in bewilderment. Sarah watched as the reality of the situation sank in for the veteran diplomat. His government was willing to cast him aside rather than admit their policies might be wrong. Niratel rose from her seat and approached her uncle, her movements graceful and purposeful. "Uncle, you don't have to choose between your loyalty to the Council and your love for me. You can choose a third option." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering with words, Niratel gently took her uncle's upper right hand in both of hers. The contact was brief, but Sarah saw the immediate change in Kethlar's expression. His breathing apparatus stilled completely for a moment, then resumed with a deeper, more relaxed rhythm. "Oh," he breathed, understanding dawning in his silver eyes. "Oh, this is what you've been trying to tell me." The simple touch between relatives had done what hours of argument could not. Kethlar finally understood what the young aliens had experienced, not addiction or intoxication, but the profound peace that came from genuine emotional connection. "Attention all vessels. Captain Morrison announced over the station's external communication array. "This is Station Harmony. We are currently providing sanctuary to individuals seeking asylum from oppressive governmental policies. Any attack on this station will be considered an act of war against Earth and will be responded to accordingly." The response came from the lead council warship. "Captain Morrison, you are harboring fugitives from justice and interfering with internal council affairs. Surrender the rebels for proper rehabilitation or face the consequences." "Negative," Morrison replied firmly. "These individuals have committed no crimes. They are seeking freedom of association and the right to choose their own emotional well-being. Earth recognizes their asylum claims under interspecies humanitarian law." "There is no such law," the council commander responded. "There is now," Morrison said grimly. Sarah was monitoring the tactical display when she noticed something that changed everything. The smaller ships carrying refugee aliens weren't just arriving randomly. They were coordinating their approach and forming defensive formations around the station. "Captain," she called out, "I think we're about to have help." The communication system crackled to life with a new transmission. This time, the voice belonged to someone whose identity sent shockwaves through both the refugee aliens and the council forces. "This is Senior Arbitrator Nethvar Veltosis, commanding the independent vessel Truth's Promise. I am declaring my withdrawal from the Council of Worlds and placing myself under Earth's protection." Through the viewport, Sarah could see a massive Zephyrian dreadnought breaking formation with the council fleet and moving toward the station. Its weapons systems powered down as it approached, broadcasting peaceful intentions. "Moreover," Nethvar continued, "I am not alone. 17 council ships have joined me in this declaration. We represent millions of citizens across dozens of worlds who are tired of being denied basic emotional fulfillment in the name of social stability." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a refugee crisis anymore. It was a civil war within the Council of Worlds itself. The elderly Vraxian diplomat who had been present during the initial confrontation stepped forward, her scales shifting to colors Sarah had never seen before. "My name is Virathel Nexandra," she announced. "I am the senior council representative on this station, and I hereby formally request political asylum from Earth. My government's policies violate every principle of sentient rights that civilized species should uphold." One by one, other alien diplomats began making similar declarations. Not all of them, but enough to make it clear that the situation had evolved far beyond anything the council had anticipated. The young aliens who had started this crisis by simply wanting to touch humans were now watching their choice trigger a fundamental transformation of galactic politics. As Ziktar approached Sarah, his compound eyes reflecting wonder and concern in equal measure. "Commander Chen, we never meant for this to happen. We just wanted to experience the connection that humans share so freely." Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder, the gesture now carrying implications that extended far beyond personal comfort. "Ziktar, sometimes the most important changes begin with the simplest choices. You chose happiness over fear. Everything else follows from that." The council warships were regrouping, their formations indicating preparation for a serious assault. But they were now facing not just human defenses, but a coalition of rebel ships commanded by their own former allies. Dr. Vasquez was analyzing readings from all the aliens who had experienced human contact during the crisis. "Sarah, you need to see this data. Every single one of them is showing improved cognitive function, enhanced creative thinking, and elevated problem-solving abilities. Human contact isn't just making them happier, it's making them smarter." The implications were profound. The council hadn't just been denying their citizens emotional fulfillment, they had been actively suppressing their intellectual potential. As the two fleets faced off around Station Harmony, Sarah realized that this confrontation would determine not just the fate of a few young refugees, but the future of consciousness and freedom across the galaxy. The war for the right to touch had become a war for the right to think, to feel, and to choose one's own destiny, and at the center of it all was the simple, revolutionary act of one species offering their hand in friendship to another. 3 years later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Harmony, the massive space city that had grown around the original station. What had begun as a simple diplomatic outpost had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly integrated society where dozens of species lived, worked, and loved together freely. The transformation had not been easy. The initial battle above Station Harmony had lasted 6 months, with Council forces attempting to blockade the contaminated zone, while refugee ships continued to arrive daily. The conflict had only ended when the rebellion spread to over half the Council worlds, forcing the remaining hardline governments to negotiate rather than face total social collapse. The result was the Harmony Accords, a new interspecies treaty that guaranteed the right of individual choice in social and emotional relationships. Some species had chosen to maintain their traditional isolation, and humanity respected that decision. But many others had embraced the possibility of deeper connection, creating communities that flourished in ways their founders had never imagined. Sarah walked through the central plaza, where children of a dozen species played together in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. A young human girl was teaching a group of Krillian younglings how to skip rope, while a Felinian adolescent shared art supplies with children whose skin, scales, and crystalline surfaces reflected their diverse origins. "Commander Chen," called a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Ziktar approaching, no longer the nervous young alien she had first met. His confidence had grown along with his role as Director of Interspecies Youth Development. Beside him walked his bond partner Maria Santos, a human linguist whose work had been instrumental in developing the new communication protocols that made integrated communities possible. "It's just Sarah now. Ziktar," she said with a smile, embracing both him and Maria in the casual physical affection that had become normal in New Harmony society. "How are the integration programs developing?" "Beyond our wildest projections," Maria replied, her arm naturally finding its way around Ziktar's waist. "We're seeing enhanced learning capabilities across all species when they're educated in mixed groups. The social bonding doesn't just improve emotional health, it's creating hybrid thinking patterns that are solving problems none of our species could tackle alone." They paused at a memorial wall dedicated to those who had sacrificed for the revolution. Technora's name was prominently displayed, along with hundreds of others who had died in Council rehabilitation facilities or during the initial conflicts. But below each name was a holographic display showing the communities that had formed because of their courage. "Any word from the Council territories?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be complex. Ziktar's antennae drooped slightly. "Mixed results. The younger generations are increasingly restless, especially as communication with the free territories continues to improve. But the older populations remain fearful of change. Some worlds have requested observer status for potential integration, while others have reinforced their isolation protocols. It was a source of ongoing sadness that families remained divided across the political boundaries. Niratel's parents, for example, had never reconciled themselves to their daughter's choice, though they occasionally sent careful, formal messages through diplomatic channels. As if summoned by Sarah's thoughts, Niratel herself appeared from a nearby transport hub. The former Zephyrian was now barely recognizable as the same individual who had first extended her hand in that conference chamber. Her silver skin glowed with health and contentment, and her movements carried a grace that spoke of deep inner peace. "Sarah," she called out, breaking into a run to embrace her friend. "Perfect timing. I have news from the latest Council border worlds." Niratel had become one of the most effective ambassadors for integration, serving as living proof that change was possible without loss of identity. Her diplomatic missions to worlds considering joining the free territories had been remarkably successful. "3 more systems have voted to join us," she announced, her silver eyes sparkling with joy. "The Aquarian Collective has officially submitted their integration request, and 2 Vraxian colonies have declared independence from the Council to pursue open contact policies." The news was significant, but Sarah noticed something else in Niratel's expression. "There's something else, isn't there?" Niratel's glow intensified, and she exchanged glances with Ziktar and Maria. "The medical research teams have made a breakthrough. Dr. Vasquez's work on interspecies biochemistry has led to something incredible." She activated a holographic display from her personal communicator, showing complex biological data that Sarah's non-medical background couldn't fully interpret. Elena's discovered that the beneficial effects of human contact on other species isn't one-directional, Niratel explained. Humans who form close bonds with aliens show enhanced creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and increased emotional resilience. The integration isn't just helping us. It's creating a new form of consciousness that's greater than the sum of its parts. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just offering emotional healing to other species. They were all evolving together into something unprecedented. Dr. Vasquez herself appeared as if on cue, stepping out of a nearby research facility with her characteristic purposeful stride. She had aged well in the 3 years since the crisis, her hair now silver but her energy undimmed. "Sarah, good, you're here," Elena said, approaching with a datapad in hand. "I wanted to share the latest results with all of you. The hybrid communities aren't just psychologically healthier. They're developing new forms of artistic expression, scientific innovation, and social organization that none of our species achieved independently." She gestured toward a group of mixed-species artists working on a massive sculpture nearby. That piece incorporates Krillian mathematical precision, human emotional expression, Vraxian color theory, and Sylvian harmonic resonance. The result is something that speaks to consciousness itself, regardless of species. Sarah watched the artists' work, seeing how they moved together with an almost telepathic coordination. It was clear that something new was emerging from the integration. Not the loss of individual species identity that the Council had feared, but the creation of a meta-identity that enhanced rather than replaced what came before. "There's one more thing," Elena added, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "We're beginning to see children born to integrated communities who show capabilities that neither parent species possessed. Enhanced empathy, improved pattern recognition, and most remarkably, an intuitive understanding of interspecies communication that doesn't require translation technology. The future," Sarah realized, "would be shaped by these children who would grow up seeing diversity as natural and cooperation as the default mode of existence." Ambassador Kethlar, now serving as the Free Territory's primary liaison with remaining Council worlds, joined their group. His transformation had been as remarkable as his niece's, though it had taken longer for him to fully embrace the changes. "The Council Supreme Arbitrator has requested a formal meeting," he announced. "Not for negotiation, but for observation. I believe they're finally beginning to understand that we haven't lost our identities. We've found our true selves." Sarah looked around, at her friends, beings who had risked everything for the simple right to choose connection over isolation. They had triggered a revolution that was still spreading across the galaxy. One handshake, one embrace, one act of friendship at a time. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked them. "Giving up your old lives for this uncertainty?" Niratel, Ziktar, and the others exchanged glances before breaking into laughter, a sound that carried harmonics from multiple species but somehow created a perfect chord. "Sarah," Niratel said, taking her friend's hand as she had that first day, "we didn't give up our old lives. We discovered that we had never truly been alive before." As the artificial sunset painted new harmony in shades of gold and silver, Sarah reflected on how a simple question, "Why aren't we allowed to touch humans?" had changed the course of galactic civilization. The answer, it turned out, was simple. Because touch led to understanding, understanding led to choice, and choice led to freedom. And freedom, once experienced, could never be taken away again. In the distance, new ships were arriving, carrying more refugees from the Council territories. The revolution continued one connection at a time, proving that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't technology or politics or military might. It was the simple, revolutionary act of reaching out to another being and saying, "You are not alone."